Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of For Checking TV. I'm your host, Doug Glacky, and alongside me is Scotty Porterfield. And before we get started, hockey's back. It's training camp time. It's time, to start getting excited again, get things going again, and start doing some podcasts again. But Scotty, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, Dougie. And like you said, hockey season's right around the corner. Penn's first preseason game is tomorrow against Columbus. I know that some other preseason action got underway today. I'm pretty sure Toronto and Ottawa have a doubleheader going on, which is something else I noticed that the Pens are doing too. They're playing like a doubleheader against Columbus. So that'll be interesting to watch those two games go down. And, yep, it's finally back. We're ready to get rolling.
Yeah, it's interesting how they're doing the split squad games, almost like MLB spring training style. But it's going to be cool to see because I feel like we're going to see a lot of things from a lot of players that we normally wouldn't get to see otherwise.
Yeah, I think that's another good thing about it too, is the fact that you do get all this exposure for all these players. They do get the chance to, see a lot more guys and maybe evaluate them better, as opposed to, instead of only getting one game to work, now they have, a few more at least. So it should be interesting to see how things play out.
Yeah. Now, before we get fully into the training camp and preseason talk, I feel like we should probably recap the off season because we haven't really posted an episode since Chris Letang got extended. So Malkin got extended. Surprise. Everybody shouldn't be mad about this. I think that he's going to have a great year. Lots of shuffling on the defensive side of the puck, though. John Marino getting traded to New Jersey for Ty Smith, which is an interesting little thing. We'll talk about that more in a little bit, as Ty Smith is likely going to be fighting for the number 6 defenseman job on the third pairing with Jan Ruda. And, not probably the biggest trade that they've made in years with Montreal. Mike Matheson going to the Canadiens in exchange for Jeff Petrie and Ryan Poehling. And with Petrie, that is probably the best defenseman that you have playing behind Chris Letang that you've ever had, ever since Justin Schultz was at the peak of his powers in 2017. And I think that I think it's going to be exciting to see. And I think we're all looking forward to watching how he grows on a pairing with Marcus Pettersson and how much better the offense is going to look, knowing that they're going to have another beyond competent option on the second pairing to be able to get the puck up the ice to the forwards.
Yeah, so when these moves were going down, it was pretty much a whirlwind because they happened one after the other. And whenever they were made, I'm like, okay, we didn't really understand at the moment, because it's like you didn't need to. The thought process was, okay, we don't need to add more defensemen in. The team already had plenty of those guys to begin with. And, we were looking to move some guys out. Instead, we just ended up bringing more in the process. Don't get me wrong, I have no objection to bringing in Jeff Petrie. I think he could be a solid second option in terms of offense, like you said, Dougie. Especially with him and Pettersson. Apparently, from the reports early on here at training camp, apparently those two are looking really good together. So I expect that to be the pairing going forward. The one that really puzzled me, is just, and I've talked with you about this before, the guys that I feel for right now are Chad Ruhwedel and Mark Friedman. They're the guys that are pretty much on the outside looking in, and they weren't bad last season. They weren't playing terribly. I thought they were, honestly, you can make the case they were two of the better defensemen that the Penguins had in that series against the Rangers. Friedman even added in a goal that plus minus was up for the most part. So it's I kind of have a hard time seeing those two finding a place to fit in now. Excuse me. But again, obviously there's some moves that are going to be made, and it's going to be a very competitive training camp, trying to determine who's going to end up making this final team.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing that we need to keep in mind is that Ron Hextall's already said that it's not out of the realm of possibility that another trade isn't made. With that being said, though, I do agree about the Ruedel and Friedman situation. You gave them both 2-year extensions. And the issue is they're both good enough to play in your top 6, and you really should not put either of them on waivers, because if you do, every single team is probably going to end up putting a claim in, and you are more than likely to lose them for nothing. And the whole thing with Ruedel is like, I mean, I think Ruedel more than Friedman. I know Friedman was great in a small sample size, but like when you take everything away from the combination of metrics and eye test, Chad Ruedel was like one of their top 3 best defensemen last year, behind Chris Letang and Mike Matheson whenever he was going in stretches where he was on a heater.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And the thing, that's a guy who's, such a hard worker, obviously, with Ruedel. Every time you see like an optional skate, you see like who shows up. His name's always on the list. It seems like he never misses a day. And you just, like I said, I feel for the guy because, they finally gave him a real, season to, they give him a chance to run with an opportunity. And now I feel like it's sort of being not taken away in a sense, but, now he has to work hard again. He has to work again for his position, because I don't think it's secured for him yet. I just don't think it is. Same goes with Friedman. I thought he proved that I can play at the NHL level. I'm a competent defenseman. He proved that last season when he played for the Penguins. And now, again, you've brought in all these guys, and now it seems like he's going to have to work even harder to try and stick around here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing in terms of defensemen, like I think the person who has the most pressure on them going into training camp is P.O. Joseph. It's put up or shut up time at this point. Even though there really isn't a spot for him, he has to come in and essentially take somebody's job, because he's no longer waiver exempt. He's on a one-way contract, and he's at that age now where he needs to start proving his worth, not only to NHL team, or not only to the Penguins, but to potentially other NHL teams this training camp. As if he doesn't make the roster, he's either going to go on waivers, or likely you could see a trade being facilitated in theory.
Yeah, like you said, that's a guy who we've heard a lot of great things about. When he first got called up 2 seasons ago, the word was basically, hey, this guy is, he was NHL ready in 2020, and he never got the chance to get called up. And then, things kind of just, I don't want to say crapped out for him, but he didn't really see his playing opportunity. And like I said, you had a couple of guys who honestly passed him up. So now it's like, okay, you were this former first-round pick. There was a lot of, stock invested in you, obviously. And now here we are. Like you said, though, it's his time. He has to prove, hey, I can play at the NHL level. Not only can I, it's not enough to just be, just to make the team. I think it's time to have, start to have an impact. You know what I mean? That's what it's coming down to for him, because this defensive core is loaded, and this team has proven that they have plenty of defensive options. So if you aren't going to be one of the guys that we can count on, probably not going to end up being a member of this team, because they have plenty of options looking forward.
Yeah. And, the big thing for Joseph right now is he's been skating in all the training camp practices paired with Chris Letang. And this is something that I brought up to you in passing before, where I just think that it's time. I think it's time to try it and see if it works. And if it does, that's your trade. That's your avenue to get cap space to work with going into the year, is potentially moving out somebody like Brian Dumoulin. Because in my opinion, you're not breaking up Pettersson and Petrie, and you just signed Jan Ruda. And regardless of what happens, Ty Smith needs a roster spot. Ty Smith needs a spot in the lineup to play and continue to develop and grow. The only way that they're going to get Ty Smith to rebound is if he's in the lineup every night, in my opinion. You know, and I feel like the same goes for Joseph. It's like, yeah, he could probably squeak through waivers, but what value is he getting from a development and a career perspective playing 20 minutes a night down in Wilkes-Barre with Taylor Fadun? Like, there's nothing there. You have to go and put him and have him. If he does put in the work, you need to reward him and give him that time and give him that NHL roster spot. Because in my opinion, I think that he is matured enough, both from a hockey aspect and a physical aspect, to the point where he will be able to play with Chris Letang. And I think we're no longer looking at this great offensive dynamo that everybody was hyping him up to be whenever he was first traded here, whenever the Penguins traded Phil Kessel. I think we're looking at a Marcus Pettersson type of defenseman with a little more offensive game, which when you're paired with Chris Letang, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, and I think that was like their intention whenever they brought him in, was, okay, this guy is going to be able to, he could potentially be our next top two defenseman on the left side. I think that was pretty much the idea whenever he was acquired, back in 2019. But again, like you said, it's put up or shut up time. I want to believe that POJ can make this team and have an impact on this roster, but he's going to have to be the guy that determines that. So we'll see how things play out for him. I'm hoping the best for him.
Exactly. Moving forward, Danton Heinen taking a 1-year, $1 million contract to stay in Pittsburgh and bet on himself. This guy is one of my favorite players to watch on the team, and I did not think that I could like the guy any more than I already did, but here you go. That's going to be a really, really good top 9 scoring option for them, whether it's playing with Evgeny Malkin or playing on the line with Jeff Carter. I think having him back in the fold takes what looked like a bleak depth scoring department to okay, and we'll get into it deeper in a few minutes. There are quite a few guys that they've been working in training camp that, in my opinion, could also come up at various points throughout the year and make an impact and potentially make the team a lot deeper and a lot more deadly going into a stretch run later in the year.
Yeah, so just going off of Heinen, I wasn't overjoyed whenever I saw him coming back. Nothing against him. I know he's one of your guys, Dougie, but I wasn't that excited to have Heinen come back into the fold. I was expecting him to walk in free agency, to be honest with you, but here he is. And again, if this is what the Penguins think is going to work out for him, then so be it. I like to see him again put up more points on that second or third line, obviously depending on where they end up putting him. I think he's probably looking. He could. It just depends on how things go with Jason Zucker. He's going to be an X factor on how well does he play with Malkin, and will they end up going back to him again? I think there's a lot of things that are going to have to be determined as well. But we'll see how things work out for Heinen. Obviously, he's familiar with this group, so he shouldn't have too hard of a time adjusting again. But we'll see how things work out for him. And hopefully, like you said, he can be that depth scorer that the team needs in order to, make a push in the playoffs.
Yeah, and that's the thing that's so difficult about like a handful of guys that are going to be depth options. You could say the same for Jeff Carter, Kasperi Kapanen, and Jason Zucker, where it's like they're great ideas and great options if everything goes perfectly, which it's never going to go perfectly. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to get banged up. Somebody's going to fall into, kind of like Kasperi Kapanen. Somebody's going to fall into a massive slump where they forget how to shoot the puck for 45 games. That's just how it goes, unfortunately. But with Heinen, he looked good in that playoff series, I thought, with the Rangers. I thought that there were times where he was one of the few players on the roster who looked like he had legs, and he looked really good on the second power play unit. So I'm hoping that they go back to that and use him as a weapon there moving forward. But as for how the Penguins are doing business, Mike Sullivan's going back to the thought process of doing the line pairings. So the way it's set up in camp is Jake Gensel and Sidney Crosby are paired together. Evgeny Malkin and Brian Rust are paired together. And then Jeff Carter and Kasperi Kapanen are together. And obviously the fourth pairing is Teddy Bluger and Brock McGinn. So basically that's where those 8 guys are going to start the year, and the rest of it they will figure out as the camp goes. Scotty, what do you think of that?
I wasn't, entirely objective to it. The only objection I did have was with with Malkin and Rust. I understand that we've seen Crosby play with Zucker, and Zucker was scoring out of his mind. Sid played with Raquel, and Raquel was, lighting the world on fire then too. And I understand, you want to maximize your offense as much as you can, but you can't deny the fact that when Brian Rust plays with Jake Gensel and Sidney Crosby, they are arguably the best first line in hockey. You can't deny that. And I think when you start to mess with that, chemistry of say, it's not really worth it. I think you're better off rolling with that first line, trying to let the rest of the guys plug. I think you'd be better off combining Malkin and Raquel at first, and then letting them try and figure things out, because I feel like that's one of your, more viable options, at least. They're obviously trying to, find new ways to expand the offense. But I mean, that first line is just so good together. To split them up is a little bit. I don't know if I agree with it necessarily, but I understand what Sullivan's trying to achieve. I'm fine with the other 3 guys getting paired together. That those all make sense, obviously. Maybe a Carter working with maybe like either Zucker or somebody. Maybe I'd understand that pairing a little bit more. But again, he played with Kapanen all last year, so I'm fine with it. There's just a lot of things that they got to factor in.
Yeah, and I think the whole thing with Malkin and Russ being together is I feel like Sullivan has seen over his time coaching here in Pittsburgh that as long as you put somebody with good offensive instincts up there with Sidney Crosby and Jake Gensel, good things are going to happen. I think the biggest X factor, if you do it that way, is you have to find the right piece to click with Malkin and Rust, because Malkin and Rust are great together. It's just they need that third wheel to be overly competent to, be able to keep the train rolling. We saw that really the entire second half of the 2018 season when Brian Rust was playing left wing with Malkin and Phil Kessel.
Yeah. So that could be one of the things that they look at, obviously. You kind of touched on it before we started about some of the younger kids coming up from Wilkes-Barre. We're getting a chance to play with Sid and Gensel, in particular, Valtteri Puustinen, who I think he only played like 3 or 4 games last year and spent all that time on the fourth line. But they've been working him with Sid and Gensel early on. And that's I was a little surprised when I saw it, but then I remembered, hey, how many times have the Penguins done that? They've called a kid up from Wilkes-Barre to play with Sid, and then things end up working out. Jake Gensel is obviously the example, but what are your thoughts on that here in the early going?
What is so bizarre about this is I did Penguins lunch with Nick Berlansky earlier this week, and after we were done recording, we talked about this jokingly, and it just kind of happened. So I'm very interested to see how it goes. I know Taylor Haas asked both Sid and Mike Sullivan about it, and apparently the thinking is that if one of the top 6 players gets hurt, Puustinen's coming up and taking that spot. Like whoever's playing with Sid, if they get hurt, Puustinen will be there. And I think that sets up, it's not really going to be a big storyline early on, but like big picture wise, once we get into like February and March, it might be a huge storyline, because I am of the thinking that once Valtteri Puustinen gets up here, he's going to play himself into a position where they cannot send him back down. and they have to work him in to the lineup. So, at that point, in theory, you could essentially give Ricard Raquel his own line with Jeff Carter and give them the keys to the Ferrari to be a great third line. And you basically have, a god tier third line similar to the HBK line all over again. And that's something that they obviously have not had for quite some time, hence why they really haven't been winning playoff series. And I think that if Puustinen were able to get up here at some point and make a great immediate impact, the sky's the limit for this team from a scoring depth perspective, because he's that good, in my opinion. I mean, we saw in the 1 or 2 games he got last year, they had him on the fourth line, he looked out of place, and then they put him up with Jeff Carter, and he sat up Carter for a goal, like almost instantly. So I'm looking forward to seeing that at some point in the year, but at the same time, you really, really want the team to stay healthy.
Yeah, and again, I don't have an objection with Puustinen coming up and getting some work in with these guys. Obviously, before the offseason began, I was all for Puustinen making the team. I wanted him to be, like you said, one of those depth winners on the third or fourth line. I figured that's where he'd be fit to start out. But obviously they're looking at him now as a potential top 6 option. Like you said, it probably won't happen, right away, and I don't think it should either. But I'm willing to explore that option. Obviously, it's he's not the biggest guy in the world. He's undersized, but again, there's a lot of guys that if you have like you said, if he has the right instincts, he's not going to have any problem playing with Sid and Gensel.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for me with all the young guys is it's starting to remind me of 2016 again. You got Drew O'Connor taking shifts down on the fourth line with Teddy Blueger, Brock McGinn. He's not going to be a world beater, but he's still going to be a damn good fourth liner, similar to what Tom Kuhnackel was whenever he was called up in 2016. I think that, I'm not going to throw the actual lofty comparison on Puustinen I want to throw on him, but I really think that he could kind of be like how Connor Sherry was whenever he needed to come up in 2016. There's so many guys that we haven't even touched on yet. Drake Caggiula is a much older guy, veteran in the league, but I still think that if he needed to come up and play a couple games in the somewhere in the top 9, I would not be opposed to it. I think that he is an interesting project for the year for the Penguins in the fact of he's never really had good coaching in his career. And I'm very curious to see what Mike Sullivan could be able to do for Drake Caggiula's play and his career. And, same thing with Alex Nylander. Nylander's in a similar position where with Puustinen, where you can't really put him on a third or fourth line checking role. But like if an injury were to occur to somebody like Kasperi Kapanen or Jason Zucker, I would not mind seeing Alex Nylander come up and get shifts with Jeff Carter. As for like the actual main top prospects, though, keep Poulin and Legare down in the minors to start. Like keep them down there for as long as you can. I want to see Sam Poulin get more and more comfortable playing center at the pro level. I think that he could be a long-term fix there if they just keep working with him and allow him to continue to develop at the pace that he needs to go at.
I don't even know what to think of Poulin and Legare at this point. To me, it seems like there are so many guys that have leapfrogged them. I don't even know if they would even fit on this roster anymore. Like, I just don't see things working out in that sense. I'm not buying into the hype like I did, in seasons past. Maybe I'm just being cynical, but I don't see the value that those two would bring to a team right now. Obviously, they're saying that Poulin is coming to camp in pretty good shape and all this and that. And the other guy that we're neglecting to mention too was Radim Zahorna was another guy that Sullivan was talking about. He's saying that he is in phenomenal shape. So, like I said, maybe it's just because we're in the first few days of training camp and guys are, we're seeing so many names get thrown around that we tend to forget, obviously. But I don't really know where some of those guys fit in. and that's the only issue is, I don't have an objection with Kajula. I mean, obviously I don't. Not only would he be a good option on like the checking line, but he has experience playing with good players. He's played with McDavid and Draisaitl up in Edmonton. He played with Kane in Chicago, I'm pretty sure. Obviously, I don't think he'd have a hard time adjusting to playing with Sid up too. But again, that's far fetched, obviously. But if it ever needed to become an option, it could be one. And as far as Nylander is concerned, again, it's kind of like the same thing where I don't know if I think he's more similar to POJ in the sense that it maybe not as much that it may be put up or shut up time for him, but it's I don't want to see the guy get buried in Wilkes-Barre any longer, but at the same time, I don't really see where he could potentially fit in unless, Kapanen really, has another terrible season, in which case, okay, maybe you look into that option. But yeah, I think there's too many cooks in the kitchen. I think is what I'm trying to get at. And unfortunately, there's only so many pots to go around. Some of these guys are gonna. I feel like at some point these guys are either gonna have to go to Wilkes-Barre. Maybe you got to shop them around a little bit because some of these guys I just don't see fitting in here.
Plus, not to even mention, it's like Philip Hollander doesn't even exist anymore.
Yeah,
yeah, and he's somebody that I read an article from Seth Rohrabaugh. He's somebody that he stated that if he needed to come up, he would likely go and play with like Jeff Carter or on the fourth line, which would make sense. But beyond that, you're right. And it's one of those things. They're in such a weird spot because it's like these prospects are too good to waste away in Wilkes-Barre, but also not good enough to net you something in a big trade.
They're perfect to go to Europe.
Probably.
That's where they're perfect to end up at. And like you said, I completely forgot about Philip Hollander until you mentioned him. So it's like there's so many guys on this team where it's just I believe they can play at the NHL, but they can't play on this team just because of all the moves that have been made. It's just you leave them in Wilkes-Barre, they're playing. They're going to be playing against competition that they're too good to play against.
Right.
There's just too many. There's too much of it.
Yeah, and Nylander gives off huge Daniel Sprong vibes, where it's good player, great offensive talent and everything, but he just doesn't have the complete game enough to carve out a career at the NHL level.
You give him a Sprong comparison. That's like the kiss of death for you, Dougie, when you give the guy the Sprong comparison.
It is. It's very bad. And I think the big thing for all the prospects, especially the guys at forward, is, it's a tough spot for the team and it's a tough spot for the players because I feel like we were going into a year where we thought we were going to lose both Danton Heinen and Kasperi Kapanen to either free agency or trades. And, that's why, as recently as 2 months ago, you and I had Valtteri Puustinen penciled in our minds as a third line winger, because they committed all this money. They brought back the core. They signed Rickard Rakell to what's probably going to be a very, very shaky contract extension. Although I do still really like the player and I'm glad they traded for him. But in my opinion, and we can talk about this, in my opinion, that's probably the worst contract Ron Hextall signed this summer. Not only because of the length and the money, but you got to keep in mind so many middle tier wingers like that, like Rakell, stayed in free agency for so long and they took contracts at pennies on the dollar, cheap contracts, and on top of that, if they would have went with a short-term fix, like signing Sonny Milano or bringing in Evan Rodriguez back, they could have gone into free agency next year being able to sign essentially whoever the hell they wanted.
I'm gonna hold out hope on Ricky Rax. I feel like he's got those offensive instincts. He's clearly proven that he can play it with either Sid or Gino. I'm going to hold out hope that he's going to pull it together. I feel like he's got what it takes to work with either of those guys, and he needs to at this point. You put the money in his pocket now. You kind of have to. He needs to work things out with those guys, and hopefully that ends up happening. As far as Rodriguez, those options for Rodriguez and Milano, I was surprised that they stayed on the market as long as they did. I think I forget, where did Milano get his PTO at? Was it with Calgary? Yeah, so he's, I feel like that's going to be an interesting one for him. Rodriguez they've already started working him with the Nate dog apparently up in Colorado. That could be an interesting combination to see looking forward, and I'm wondering how that's all going to play out. But again, with Milano, that was the one that kind of shocked me that he's on a PTO. I figured, after how well he played with Zegras last year, most teams would be killing to have a guy like that on their team.
Yeah, I read a 32 Thoughts column probably about a month ago that said that teams were worried about his concussion history and were worried about his ability to stay healthy, and that's why everything rode out as long as it did. But in terms of Calgary, that's one hell of a get for them because, even though you lost literally your entire core in one offseason, that team looks freaking loaded. I think they are infinitely better on paper going into this year than they were last year. And a big part of that is because they got players that are going to be able to play Daryl Sutter's system. Kadri's going to buy into that. Huberdeau plays it to a T. Mackenzie Weegar is going to probably end up becoming a star and a household name under the tutelage of Daryl Sutter with the way that he runs defenses. And on top of that, they have Jacob Markstrom and Dan Vladar, which is a great goaltending tandem. And if something happens to them, Dustin Wolf is just big chilling, waiting in the wings, waiting for his opportunity to come in and make an impact at the NHL level.
When all those moves got made, whenever they lost Gaudreau and they traded away Tkachuk, I was convinced that was going to be a very long offseason. This is going to be a very long season for Calgary, just because of you see they lost their core pieces, like you said. They've bounced back right away. Like you said, the Kadri signing is huge. That's definitely a guy who's going to fit well into that Daryl Sutter system. Weegar definitely has that potential. I'm hoping that Huberdeau does his thing. I think it's going to take a bit of an adjustment for him to really settle in up there in Calgary. But again, hopefully time will tell. But I think if there's going to be a slow learning curve for somebody, I think it's going to be him. But like you said, they still have that. The goaltending is going to be fine. They still have Markstrom. He's going to be doing his thing. So yeah, if anyone, Calgary was definitely the big surprise for me this offseason, as in terms of what they were able to do and just keeping the team together. And not keeping the team together, just staying relevant, obviously, in terms of how good their players were that they brought in.
Yeah, and I just have to read this forward group off real quick because it just looks ridiculous. Line 1's Huberdeau, Lindholm, and Toffoli. Line 2 is Mangiapane, Kadri, and Blake Coleman. Line 3 right now is Sonny Milano, Mikhail Backlund, and Dylan Dubé. And then fourth line might be the best checking line in hockey in terms of just grit and combination of grit and skill. And you have Milan Lucic, Kevin Rooney, and Brett Ritchie.
A lot of goons on that fourth line.
A lot of goons and a Milan Lucic that randomly decided, hey, I know how to score 20 goals again.
And that's all. And that's at that point, if you have him on your fourth line, that's all you want from him too.
Terrifying.
That's all you need from him. I mean, good for them. I was hearing some rumors that Boston was looking at trying to bring him back into the fold, via trade, obviously. But I mean, if you're Lucic, why would you want to leave that? Why would you want to leave Calgary now? I feel like that's your team to go for.
Yeah, and I feel like
compared to Boston, at least.
Definitely. And I feel like this is a good team to like probably throw down a futures bet to win the Stanley Cup on. I really think that it is that well put together and that they're going to, they're going to have the ability to go on a deep run. Um, Moving forward, though, big thing I saw today was Zach Aston Reese is on a PTO in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Played on the third line a little bit. And the most random Leafs thing I saw is they are trying to get the Michael Bunting thing to happen with Adam Gaudette, which just seems absolutely impossible to me.
I'm not buying that one.
It's horrible.
No.
Absolutely terrible. Anything else you want to talk about?
Oh, we can talk Leafs a little bit. We might as well. Another guy that I thought was a little bit surprising was Aston Reese getting a PTO. I figured, given just how great his defensive game is, some teams want to, offer him up something, but at the same time, I think they also, value the offense more than the defense. So that's probably why things ended up going the way they did. But good for him, I guess. The key for the Leafs heading into this season, and I don't want to put any more pressure on this guy because Ward knows he already has so much of it. Your X factor's in net. If Matt Murray does not, if he's not proving that if he doesn't prove that he can be the goalie for you guys, there's no hope for this team. I mean, they got a lot of heat for bringing him into the fold anyway, given the fact that he won five? Did he win 5 games last year? I think that was all he won was 5. Either way, that's a move that has a lot of potential to go left. And if it does, man, it's say goodbye to Matthews.
Yeah, sorry, I had trouble finding it at first. It was 5 games. He only won. And the big thing that I think is going to help them is they have Ilya Samsonov to piggyback off of. I think this is going to be a true 1A, 1B type of tandem. And in my opinion, this is something that Matt Murray needs. He needs somebody on his heels to work with him and make him better and motivate him to keep going, in a sense. And, the big thing with Toronto is, say what you want, but like this is going to be the best defensive core that he has played in front of since he won the Stanley Cup in 2017.
And that's the point that I'm getting at too, is like there's no excuse anymore for him.
No.
I could buy, all right, your last 2 years in Pittsburgh, you had Jack Johnson, Eric Branson in front of you. Fine. In Ottawa, they were a dumpster fire, not like how they are now. I think Ottawa's, going to make the playoffs this year. They're that good. The last 2 years in Ottawa, you didn't have anyone on the team. I get it. There's no excuse now. You have a playoff caliber team. I won't call them cup contenders. I'll call them a playoff caliber team in front of you. It's time to, turn the clock back and be the Matt Murray that you were, that everyone expected you to be.
Yeah. And I mean, the pressure's on, I feel like, for the entire organization. Kyle Dubas is going into the last year of his contract. Austin Matthews is set to hit free agency in 2024. If you do not start winning games and winning playoff series, Matthews is going to leave. Somebody's going to offer Matthews a boatload of money to play in front of a team that is better suited for what he is and what he does. And he's going to take it and run. And the big thing is for Matthews is the ball is in his court. The ESPN Plus deal is working great for the league in revenue. They're getting a second reverse retro run of jerseys from Adidas. The league's going to have money out the nose. The cap is going to go up. The cap is probably going to increase at least probably $6 to $8 million before he hits free agency, in my opinion. I mean, they already made enough money to get the players out of escrow at this point. So the only thing that's left is for the cap to go up. And if with the Leafs, it's you gotta figure it out, and it's not impressive already as they're getting to the point where they're probably going to trade Rasmus Sandin because they cannot sign him. because they do not have a spot for him, which is not really acceptable. I mean, I know that they have a great defensive group, but it's as simple as just moving out Justin Hall.
Yeah, I mean that's a name that obviously a lot of people haven't liked as of the last year or two. But I mean, maybe they just can't get any takers on the guy, and I can understand that. It doesn't seem like there's much of a market for him because if they wanted to move him out by now, they would have. They know how much of an anchor he's been so far for that team. So it's just we'll have to see how that situation plays out. But like you said, Dougie, I mean, Nate Dogg better enjoy having the highest contract in hockey for this next few couple of years because AM34 is definitely going to be getting 15 million plus once he hits the market for sure.
Yeah, and let's talk about that real quick. Nate McKinnon literally is just striving to be like Sid at this point because all he took was a $100,000 raise off of what McDavid makes to become the league's highest paid player. He did not screw over the Avalanche at all. And they are setting it up where this thing can keep going for a long, long time. And in Colorado's case, man, they're going to be so good because they brought in Galchenyuk on a PTO, which is going to be great for their fourth line. Like you and I said it, we texted a couple weeks ago after Rodriguez signed, and we said all that they need left is like a veteran guy or somebody random to go on the fourth line. And I think Galchenyuk might end up being that guy.
Yeah, definitely seems that way. I mean, he kind of got brought in. Again, like you said, he was just brought in on a PTO. I'm honestly surprised that Chucky's still around at this point. But yeah, I mean, if you're gonna latch onto a team, you want to be that one. You want to be the cup favorites for this upcoming season. I think, like you said, there's no reason why they can't repeat this year as champions. They have essentially the same team coming back minus Kadri, but you found the guys to replace him. You still have McKinnon and Rantanen. Makar's on the back end. Yeah, I mean, it's just they're going to be just fine. I don't think there should be any reason for concern in Colorado.
Rodriguez is centering their second line right now, by the way. So that's going to break my heart, and everything that I've been preaching for the past year and a half is bound to happen. But if any team was going to figure that out, it was going to be the Avalanche.
Now, remind me again, I know Kemper walked in free agency. He's in Washington now. Who's their goalie now?
Alexander Georgiev and Pavel Francouz.
Right. Okay. I say I knew that he walked. That's why I paused that last time. I was thinking, who's their goalie now? So
yeah, I think
again, that's not good. That's like a 1A 1B kind of situation up in Toronto too, kind of.
Yeah, but I also think Georgiev can be really good. He just has needed an opportunity. We got to keep in mind he was the Rangers goalie of the future before Igor randomly just burst onto the scene.
Or Pushesti showed up.
Yeah. And the whole thing is like by the end of this year, hot take, but by the end of this season, the best player in the world is going to be a defenseman, and it's going to be Cale Makar.
That's not out of the realm of possibility. I think given how he's played and developed, if he stays healthy, I don't see any reason why he might be the next. If there was ever a defenseman who had a shot at winning an MVP, it's him. He might be the first defenseman to win an MVP since Chris Pronger.
I mean, the truth is he might do it this year. He could have easily done it last year. He almost put up 30 goals from the blue line, man. Like, that's insane.
Yeah. That doesn't happen.
Yeah. And they're so deep. Bowen Byram and Eric Johnson's their third pairing, which is just impressive.
Bowen Byram could be a number one on a few NHL, a few other teams right now.
The truth is they need to lock him up to a contract ASAP. because with where they have him positioned on their roster, they can probably get him for a ridiculously low AAV compared to what he should be getting paid.
Mhm.
Is there anything else you want to address?
I think we're all good over here.
Good deal, man. All right, guys. This was another episode of Forechecking TV. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at Forechecking TV and subscribe to our YouTube. All right, guys. Thank you and good night.